Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to Strange Stories of Music episode 2. Um, Last time we talked about Frank Zappa and all the craziness with him. Now we're going to talk about one of his closest friends and big music collaborator, and he goes by his music name being Captain Beefheart. Um, and his, I guess, real name ish is Van Vliet, but he wasn't born like that. His real name before he changed it was Don Glenfleet. And let's just go ahead and start talking about him. So, like I said, he was born Don Glenfleet, and he was born in Glendale, not Greendale, Glendale, California, on January 15th of 1941. He was born pretty poor. His dad was a service station owner from Kansas, and his mom was just someone from Arkansas. I don't think she ever really held a job, a stay-at-home mom. And um, Van Fleet would go on to say many things about his parents, and we'll get also that in a second. But anything you need to know about this guy, if you thought Frank Zappa was a weird man, uh, Captain Beefheart is like if you took the craziness of Frank Zappa in his music and made him act like that all the time, and cranked that craziness up to like 11. I mean, he goes full Spinal Tap. I mean, the stuff he does is just insane, and we'll get into that in a second. Now, I won't spend too much talking about his life. He had a lot of the same story as Frank Zappa. Actually, him and Frank Zappa grew up together for a little bit. They were both went to the same high school. They both graduated from the same high school, and it's there where they would both record their first ever piece of music. I believe it was in the early '60s. They, while still in high school, recorded a little song together, and you can find it now. It's on a Frank Zappa record. It's one of his posthumous one. I think it's called "The Early Years of Zappa." But you know, they had a similar career. They were both really into the avant-garde sounds that were coming up around the time, and they'd both become really big in the avant-garde scene. And they were both into those avant-garde composers that I talked about last episode. Um, and so we have Captain Beefheart, who's kind of like for the most of his career in the shadow of Zappa. He's never as big. He never really gets known by anyone from not in that scene for a long time. And you know, looking at his records here, it's not really anything you would expect anyone to know. It's got those early recordings of the early '60s. Look at my notes here of it's like 1962, and he just kind of does those early recordings for a long time. Um, Nothing too crazy. He eventually makes his first album called "Safe as Milk," and it becomes a kind of an interesting recording. And I've heard some songs off of it. It's not as crazy as what we'll hear later. And if I can find a sample, I may play it here. But now nothing too wild there. Um, Nothing that you would think would be insanely crazy. Now there's some weird stuff on it, but it's not too weird. And he makes that Captain Beefheart and his magical band. And he releases two more albums, Strictly Personal, Mirror Man, and he even has a couple other like live stuff. Nothing too crazy. But what we came here to talk about today is what many consider his magnum opus and the best, not only one of the best avant-garde albums of all times, one of the best albums of all time. It would get a 10 from basically every. It would get a 10 or whatever the perfect score was for almost every music publication at the time if anyone reviewed it. Looking at it on Album of the Year, its critic scores are perfect. Pitchfork went back and reviewed it, gave it a 10. Rolling Stones gave it a 10. All Music, I'm pretty sure, gave it a 10 as well. It's almost perfect across every critic's board. So you must think, well, I wonder what it sounds like. And, at the end, I'll put in a little snippet for you of what it sounds like. But before we get into just the craziness of the noise off this album, let's talk about how the record was made itself, because it has a real interesting story you don't hear a lot of people talk about. Now, like I said, this album would become his magnum opus. It would uh, release in 1969 on Frank Zappa's newly formed Straight Records label, and it wouldn't be anything too crazy for him to be doing stuff on Zappa's label. They did end up doing a lot of stuff later down the road. This album's a long one too. It's a 28-track double album, and it's made in '69. Like, double albums weren't as much of a thing yet. You had Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, which really popularized it a couple years before this, and then Zappa also made his, which we talked about last episode. But it's just, still real weird to make a double album for an avant-garde piece like this. So let's just go ahead and start talking about this. The bands, started off, they were on the poorer side of the music industry. They really just made a living by doing these small shows. These albums never did crazy well, so they never had giant money to live off of. And so they all owned a house where they all lived together. The whole band lived, and they decided, all right, we're gonna make this new album. Let's see what Van Fleet wants. So the band's coming off right now of a bit of a dispute with its last record label. They just got dropped by them. They didn't like that. Well, actually, no, I think they got dropped. Yeah, I'm sorry, writing getting mixed up here. Anyways, their singles all failed to produce any hits. They were really difficult to work with because Beefheart didn't like anything being changed. He wanted everything to be like his little own sound. And the label itself was just changing into becoming more pop based. And it's just something Beefheart hated was pop. So, the band would find themselves without a record label, and I believe this is the second time this has happened. And they would do some re-recording sessions and just to get their game down a bit, and that's what became the album Strictly Personal and Mirror Man, I think I mentioned earlier. But since they didn't have a label, they didn't think that stuff would ever be released because they would, you kind of need a label to make any type of music at this time. Luckily around that time was when Frank Zappa would start his own record label, his own record label that I mentioned earlier. And he would offer Beefheart to be a name that on the label. And the big thing with him is that he, being the avant-garde guy and being all against like corporate stuff, he would give Beefheart complete artistic freedom. Now, for most bands, that's like a good thing, right? Make whatever you want. Don't have to worry about making a style of music you don't really like. It would turn out with something pretty interesting with Beefheart. In preparation for making this album, the band would rehearse a lot. They would rehearse in that house I talked about. They would rehearse for 8 months, and it's not, when I first at that house, I'm thinking people are imagining a like giant, big Hollywood house. It was a very small, like just little rented house they were purchasing. They couldn't really even afford it either. And, Van Fleet was already almost instantly got like his mind all obsessed with having complete artistic freedom. So he decided to do that in a really totally normal and natural way by locking the band inside of that house and not letting them leave. So here becomes the kind of hearsay about this whole album is that Beefheart and I think Zappa and maybe some other people say, hey, that didn't happen. But then there's some of the people part of the Magic Band, like the drummer is a big one. He would be nicknamed Drumbo by Captain Beefheart, and he says, "Yeah, that happened. We were basically kidnapped." Um, he would have them play for like hours and hours on end. I think Drumbo says that it was they would do like 14 to 8 hour sessions of just straight playing, and uh, it would be so bad that the guitarist's fingers would start bleeding. There's just a lot of abuse. Um, and let me think here. Sorry. One thing that's really interesting that you see him do is that when they're recording this album, he almost instantly changed their names. He gave them all nicknames. So like their guitarist, I believe, was a man named Hackleroad, and he became Zoot Horn Rolo. Another member was named Boston, and he became Rocket Morton. John French, who was the drummer, assumed the name Drumbo, and Jeff Cotton became and Anytime Jimmy. I mean, it was just you know him just saying the first thing that came, and Van Vliet's cousin Victor Hayden, who was staying with them at the time. Um, I mean, it was just complete craziness with that just to begin with. Um, he also would do like weird things. I'm just crediting this album. He would credit his girlfriend at the time, Laurie Stone, and it would be under the name of the audio typist. She literally just laughs at the beginning of one of the songs. But all that's not too crazy. Well, the kidnapping thing kind of is. Let's just hear how some of the band members would describe it. One band member would go on to later say that with how he would be performing all the time and doing all these practicing, that Van Vliet would be one to berate a musician continuously, sometimes for days, and he wouldn't stop until the musician would either collapse in tears or in total submission and do everything he wanted. Like I said, Bill Halkerow, the guitarist, would later on say his fingers were just a complete mess after they finished the album because Beefheart ordered that he used heavy strings, and playing for that long with heavy strings, you're gonna cut your fingers open. Um, Drumbo would say that this situation was like a cult-like, and visitors who would go to the house would say that the environment in that house was was definitely like Charles Manson like. Not a good thing to be said, especially in the time that the Manson stuff happened not too long after before this. Um, Now that's pretty bad, but can you believe that it got worse? Um, their money was basically all from welfare because none of them could work jobs because they really couldn't leave this house because Van Vliet would make fun of them and basically abuse them until they came back. Um, so they only had welfare and money from relatives to live on, and the group would go on like this monthly shopping trip, and they would come back with a couple cans of beans and some noodles. Not much, not a lot of stuff you can really use to live on. And some of the band were even arrested for shoplifting food on different occasions. And Drumbo claims that he lived on a small cup of beans a day for a whole month. That he just have his own like little tiny personal cup of beans for a whole month and be able to live off of it. Um, you know, because the band was restricted from leaving the house and only could go get jobs, like I said. And the rehearsing for 14 hours a day just kills them. And I mean, it was basically torture what Captain Beefheart was doing here. Uh, you know, that's all pretty bad. But can you believe that it got even worse when when later down the line, Drumbo would describe in one of his books about how this whole about everything about that happened on the recording of this album, that they were drumming one day and they were rehearsing, just playing a little tune, and he was like kind of slow on one of his drum parts. He wasn't playing quick enough. Now, what you do in a normal band, you say, "Hey, man, can you go a little quicker?" Or, "Can you go this tempo?" Well, the Magic Band was a bit different. He was punched by band members, thrown into walls, kicked and attacked with a sharpened broomstick, and Beefheart punched him in the face and threatened to throw him out a window. Now, you may be thinking, what did this guy do to deserve such a thing? That's insane, just to do that. Well, he admits later in the book to also attacking his bandmates anytime Beefheart would have talks with them, and would be doing the like exact same thing that his bandmates did to him, because they're all scared of Beefheart and they didn't want anything. They want to get on his bad side. So he's literally using like psychological torture to turn these people against each other. So they beat each other up for doing simple, small mistakes and making music. It is insanity. And like they would know who to attack, because Beefheart would have talks at the end of recordings and it would be aimed at people. And the craziest part about all this, he does all this, and after the album's done being recorded, Beefheart kicked Drumbo out. Now, you must be thinking, I'm sure you're actually probably not thinking this at this point because I've said this so many times. Um, oh, that sucks. What, did he just like not pay him and just throw him out? Just cut him out with contracts? That would be a normal thing to do, but as we talked about before, it's nothing but normal. Nothing but not normal. He ejected him from the band by throwing him down a flight of stairs, telling him to take a walk. And you may be wondering, what did he do to respond with this reaction? You know what he did? Do y'all know what he did? He failed to complete Van Vliet's request to play a strawberry on the drums. Now, in case you're wondering if that's some hidden music to him, it's not. He's just insane. He says, play a strawberry. Drumbo's probably like, I don't know what you mean by that, man. And so he has the very sane reaction of beating him up and throwing him down a flight of stairs and tossing his stuff at him. After that, Beefheart would replace Drumbo with the far more efficient drummer, Jeff Burchell. And you may be wondering, well, what's his drumming experience? None. He was a roadie that worked for the band, and he did not know how to play the drums, and he never played the drums before. And Beefheart would affectionately nickname him Fake Drumbo. Even though there's many of Drumbo's stuff recorded on the album, I do believe, because they already recorded the whole album when this happened, yeah. He is not credited at all. So, not fun for him. And they spend these 8 months rehearsing for this album. And you would probably assume that that they spent a large part of those 8 months rehearsing. It was also part of the recording time. It's actually not, because the entire album, all 28 songs, were made in a single session that was 8.5 hours. That's where all the songs were written. All the rehearsing was just rehearsing random stuff. just getting good at their instruments. And Van Fleet would write all the songs on a piano, an instrument he never played up until that point. And that, I mean, that's just insanity. Now, I will say that is according to Van Fleet himself. It's according to Captain Beefheart. And multiple band members have come out and stated that that's not what happened. The songs were written over the course of that year. Beginning around December, and that 8 months is them making all the songs. And Captain Beefheart would refute that claim, saying that he wrote all of them in an 8.5 hour session on the piano, an instrument he did not play. Um, and just a little side tangent here. It was also Drumbo's job for transponding and basically just rewriting everything Beefheart would do on the piano into something that actually makes sense. Uh, just he would have to take a lot of responsibility for his insanity, and because of this, I'm assuming that's probably why Beefheart kicked him out. He got jealous, stuff like that. It's pretty common, but it's just complete insanity with him. And the guitarist would later say, "We're dealing with a strange person, coming from a place of being a sculptor and a painter, using music as his idiom." He was getting more into that part of who he was instead of this blues singer. That's uh, an official quote from him, and I mean, the album's just insanity. Um, we got about 9 minutes left. So let's just. You heard about how all this craziness, abuse, beating. Oh, I didn't even talk about this. One time, Drumbo messed up a drum fill, and his response was to pull out a barrel with its lid open, and he told him to get in it. And then when he did, he got the whole band to basically beat the barrel with him inside of it with chairs and like roll it around and just beat him up while he's in the barrel. Another insane thing he did there. I can't believe I forgot to say that. Um, but no, you're probably wondering, wow, all this abuse, all this terribleness that happened. This had to be one of the greatest albums ever made that I just never heard of. What is these amazing songs that played on it? And you know what? I'll play a short little clip from one of their biggest songs on the album called Pina. I believe I'm saying that right. Pna. And just really listen to the song. So, what did y'all think? Was that the most life-changing song you ever heard? Yeah, so I can't play too much of the music here, but I will say every song about sounds like that. There's one kind of normal bluesy sounding song, but it still sounds like the blues who's played by a guy with no hands. Like, it's very avant-garde and very crazy. None of it's in tune for the most part. Almost everyone's in a different type of tuning, not in the same time signatures sometimes. And um, Beefheart would be doing his like Howlin' Wolf, inspired singing, and just all that craziness. They would actually record the instrumentals, like backing instrumentals, was recorded live, and Van Vliet would overdub most of the vocals himself, and only partial sync with the music uh, because he wanted to hear just a little bit of it because he thought it would make it better. He only heard some of it from the window that would divide him from the vocals. So he couldn't really tell what was happening, and I think it's pretty apparent. Um, Frank Zappa would be the producer, and Frank Zappa himself says that he was the producer in air quotes because he never basically touched the album, because he wanted to give Van Vliet complete artistic freedom and see where that took him. Um, and also, he would also say it was impossible to tell him why things should be such a way, and he it seemed to me that if he was going to create a unique object, that the best thing for me to do was to keep my mouth shut as much as possible and just let him do whatever he wanted to do, or do whatever I thought it was wrong or not. Messed that quote up a little bit there, but you get the point. Basically, and I've heard different interviews with Zappa, he was just like, hey, I heard about the stuff he did to his bandmates. I wasn't trying to get that. So he never really did anything on the producing side, but he is like credited as the producer. Um, Van Fleet would then go on a bit of a press tour to do some interviews, and he would stay as crazy as he was in the behind the scenes in his interviews. In some of these interviews, he would state that he was descended from adventurer and author Richard Halliburton and related to actor Slim Pickens, and that he remembered being born. Wow, I think that's something. He would ask about when asked about how long it took to make the album, he would say the time and say that that he would know because he never slept for the whole time, and the people would usually laugh and say something like, "Oh yeah, sure," but then he would be like, "Yeah, no, I'm serious. I never slept." And when asked how that was possible, he said it was because he ate a lot of fruit during the construction of this album, which also probably isn't true because they only had beans. Um, he would just say a multitude of crazier and crazier things. Uh, he claimed to have taught the guitarist and the bassist how to play their instruments from scratch. They were both on albums and accomplished musicians way before the band started. And he would also go out to make the claim, which I think you can tell just by listening to the music that it's definitely not true, that neither him nor any of the uh, people in Captain Beefheart's Magic Man have ever taken drugs. And, you know, I think if I listen to that little snippet, and if you go on, and if you're a brave enough soul and decide to listen to Trout Mask yourself, I think you'll be doubting that. And he said a lot of other crazy stuff in interviews that I can't even get into here right now. Some stuff I'm just not allowed to say. But the craziest part about this is that this is considered one of the best albums ever made. Uh, it's on the Rolling Stones list of the top 500 greatest albums of all time, and it's like All Music loved it. I've talked about a bunch of other people who loved it. People go back to it. It's not considered one of the biggest classics of that era. On albumoftheyear.com, which is kind of like the Rotten Tomatoes of music, it is the second highest rated album of this year. The first is Abbey Road, is the only other better album from 1969 according to that website, and it was inducted to the United States National Recording Registry in 2011. It's just insane to me. Like, I feel like an insane man because I don't get it. What did they like so much? Is it just because it's funny? Because it's so bad? Like, that doesn't make sense for a critic to review it like that. I'm losing my mind. I listened to this whole album in preparation for this. And I was listening actually in my Audio 2 class, which I'm doing this podcast for. And I don't know if anybody saw this, but I get out my headphones, I put it on, I start listening to this, and I slowly sink my head down and move my glasses up and just put my hand over my eyes and just look down in defeat because it's like, what have I gotten myself into? What is this? I just felt insane. But if you want to feel as crazy as I do, you can listen to it for yourself. Otherwise, that's been our show. I'm Leo Thompson. It's been Strange Story of Music. We'll see you next time.